Hi there to our Capital H listeners. We're coming to you live from Transform in Las Vegas, where we're exploring how HR leaders are shaping the future of work. Joining me today is Jordana Kammerud, the Chief Human Resources Officer at Corning Incorporated. Jordana has led HR functions at major organizations and brings a wealth of experience in business transformation, leadership engagement, and driving impactful people strategies. In this episode, we'll discuss Jordana's career journey, her insights as a CHRO, and how she partners with the board and other C-suite leaders to drive business outcomes. We'll also explore Corning's transformation, both from a business and HR perspective, and get her advice for aspiring CHROs. So Jordana, thanks so much for being here today. To start, can you introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners and share some perspective on your background?
Sure. Jordana Kammerud, born and raised in Wisconsin, child of educators. My father was a superintendent of schools and my mom a teacher, so I always joke that labor management relations was dinner table fodder. And so here I am in HR. I went to school for sociology and then went into industrial relations, started out in union relations with automotive with Chrysler.
Okay.
Later moved into HR and then executive management development and talent development. Moved over to Germany for a while with Chrysler. Also worked for American Express, SC Johnson, Cormark, Claire's, which was private equity at the time, and now Corning.
Thank you. And Jordana, you've been at a variety of companies, industry sectors, size and scale of organization. At what point in your journey did you ultimately decide you wanted that CHRO or Chief People Officer role?
This is a great question because it actually happened early, but it was someone from the outside who said something to me that sparked the interest. So when I first went into industrial relations, I had no intention of going into HR. I was really focused in the union relations side.
Okay.
And then I interned at a Daimler Chrysler truck plant in St. Louis. And one of the leaders there pulled me aside and said, you really remind me of our CHRO. Have you ever thought about how far you could go in your career? I was so junior and green at the time. I didn't even really understand what that looked like or what that meant. But it planted this seed in my mind. And as I expanded and learned more about HR and corporate world and how the functions all sort of roll up into the corporate entity, I really started to get intrigued about how much influence and impact could I have in my career?
Sure.
What would that mean for the work that I could do? And that's when I started to get really interested in progression or the career path, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, that example, what's so powerful about that is leaders need to let folks know when they see that spark of potential, right? Hey, have you thought about this, right? How many success stories have you seen and heard from other leaders where sometimes it's the flip side of, I don't think you're good enough. And that inspires people and pushes them to go and succeed at their dream. But on the flip side, like when you see potential, recognize it. And here you are today, a multi-time Chief HR Officer.
Yes, I agree. People need to say that more. And I also had those moments where people said, I don't think you can do this. And I said, challenge accepted. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So Jordana, via the types of companies you've navigated, via that background, what are some of the pivotal experiences that you would say have kind of shaped your leadership philosophy as a CHRO or as a leader broadly, right? As a business executive?
Yes. Well, I consider myself to be very challenge-oriented. And I think that has been something that I have incorporated as part of my leadership style and also my journey and the way that I think about developing others as well.
Yeah.
When you actually take a look at some of my career choices, they really were about taking a next step in challenge and not necessarily playing it safe, but playing it for experiences and for interest. So going from really big public companies into a private company, and or then later going into a private equity company, those are choices I made knowing the implications and the various trade-offs, but I was really just interested in the ability to see businesses from different value creation vectors. How do they think about long and short-term investments? And so challenge and learning has always been the way that I have defined career exploration and growth, and as a result, how I have looked at leadership and the development of others.
Yeah. I love the challenge orientation statement, right? Because that gets at a growth mindset, right? And in a world where everyone talks about the only constant is disruption, maybe the only constant is challenge. Like embracing challenge prompts you to grow, right, and learn. And that's an incredible thing. And so, Jordana, what's interesting about that comment is the last 5 years at large have been this almost challenge moment for the topic of humans in business, right? What was COVID but a pandemic that impacted humans? What is generative AI or artificial intelligence but a thing that impacts humans, right? And so in your role as a CHRO, what are some of the trends and topics that you're seeing and thinking about? These are things that as a business executive, as an HR leader, I need to be prepared to rise up and meet that challenge moment in collaboration with my peers.
Yeah, well, you're naming a lot of the big mega trends, right? We're seeing geopolitical disruption. We're seeing people having less faith in the traditional institutions and putting a lot of requirements for faith in their leadership or their work, and even having some of that erode a bit. We're seeing transformations in the way that we do work with AI and even just technology in general, how it's become so integral and into our lives.
Yeah.
So you have these big shifts. And when I'm thinking, and when my colleagues and I and my team, when we're thinking about the context within which we operate, we also then have this microcosm of what are our capabilities, what is our history and our purpose, and what do we need to do as an organization to be sustaining, to be growth-oriented, et cetera. Yeah. So it is a very interesting time because I don't think that the trends are so different for any one person because they're macro trends, right? But how they intersect and influence the moment, the state of play for your organization, that's the key. That's the magic behind strategy. That's the magic behind preparation.
Yeah.
The ability to both take a step back and look at all these things, look at your own space, and to synthesize it into some sort of, call it predictive path.
Yep.
You need to be able to forecast forward and say, what does this mean for the possible futures that our organization might have? And then, based on what that looks like, where do we need to make sure that happens or make sure that doesn't happen? Then what are the initiatives from an HR standpoint, business and an HR standpoint, that we need to enact, and other functions as well?
Yeah.
That's how I think about it abstractly.
Yep.
So example of that, of course, we do have AI coming on strong, and that capability is going to make a lot of different knowledge work processes. It's going to transform the productivity of people. That's going to have an impact on the cost profile and the profitability of the organizations who understand, embrace, and take advantage of that.
Yep.
And it's going to have an impact the other way on the organizations that do not.
Yep.
You have to really see that clearly and not think of it as something that's, oh, that's a cool, bright, shiny new thing and we should learn about it, but really think about where would that, from a business standpoint, give us advantage or disadvantage, and how do we get on that then? And how do we plan forward and address that and make that happen for us?
Yeah. Well, and Jordana, earlier today in kind of the main stage session, you continue to drive home this theme around everyone in the audience is a business executive, right? HR leaders are business executives. And what you just articulated is a focus on a business strategy. And there are people and talent components to said business strategy, right? But these aren't HR topics only. So can you share a little bit about how you collaborate with your C-suite peers on these business impacting topics and help then ground on the right points in time of where this is a workforce or people or topical domain that HR needs to drive and lead or do in collaboration with the other functions?
Well, first of all, I have brilliant colleagues, so we keep each other, and they definitely keep me on my game.
Yeah.
So it does start with our view of where, from a standpoint of our markets, we have the opportunity to grow or expand, innovate, new customers, et cetera. So they really create their viewpoint with their teams on where they could go, business strategy-wise. And then my team is intersectioned with those organizations because they have business partners that exist within the HR function. My COEs are also listening and hearing. And so we go through this process of, hey, let's look at it. Let's put it all on the table. Let's hear what the business objectives are. Let's understand where there are commonalities and where there are big themes. And then where are there, I'll call it micro themes, things that really are critical. And then we come back with our strategy from a people standpoint that says, based on what you're trying to achieve, growth here, new capabilities here, productivity here are the initiatives that we believe are going to be very instrumental to our success.
Yeah.
The trick here, in my opinion, is really being able to have a conversation with your peer colleagues about the short, mid, and long.
Yeah.
Because obviously it is my job to be the expert in the themes around people and people at work. and the trends around that topic. So it is also my job then to be able to speak and inform my colleagues about these things and these shifts and how they might impact the availability of talent or the retention of talent or the productivity of talent within their strategies. And why that's so important is because, like any business area or function, HR has a time horizon. There are some things that we can focus on in this year and immediately affect it. And there are other things that we see that we want to do or need to do or are really critically important for the business that are going to take 2-3 years before you feel the ROI of that. But if you don't start it now, 2-3 years from now, you're going to have a big problem.
Yeah, you're late.
And so being able to put a time horizon on the initiatives and the returns with my colleagues and be able to have a conversation about why it's critical we start it now is really important, because a lot of times that's where maybe the intersection on these things fails a bit. Because when you're running a P&L as a business leader, you're really thinking about, of course, the long horizon, but you have a year to deliver, right? As we all do, especially in a public company. We have a year to deliver. And so you're very thoughtful and prioritizing what do you do that it contributes to this year and what do you do to contribute to the longer term year. And if as HR leaders we're not able to articulate the investment, the time horizon, why it's important, and have a real clear understanding of when that return comes, well, then it's really hard to help a colleague understand why you're prioritizing time and attention to something that's not delivering anything in this year.
Yeah, well, and Jordana, one of the things inherent in what you said and something that you shared earlier today is that the work that you're doing with your colleagues fundamentally hasn't changed. Like workforce planning, there's a thing that you're trying to accomplish that will deliver an outcome, right? But then you said, but the options to consider have changed, right? The number of workforce worker options, full-time, contingent, third-party, digital FTE, like that's new and different as you go and engage with business leaders on the topic of workforce planning. And you could probably play that out in other areas as well. And so now it's not only the pressure for educating the business leaders on these new options, but your team staying on top of the options as well to show up credibly with folks to navigate kind of those trends. So how are you balancing some of that? Because it's not easy.
It is not easy. And there are a lot of new trends and themes, right? We've talked about gig workers. We talked about flexible working. We've talked about transformative and generative AI. And the key, as you mentioned that I spoke about earlier, is this concept of, at the end of the day, what hasn't changed is strategic workforce planning is strategic workforce planning. Culture is culture. But again, contextual themes and options definitely have changed. I think about the fallacy of the concept that talent is abundant out in the organization, or out in the world, and that if you don't have it in your organization, you can just go buy it, right? That's the concept that we used to always say, do you build, do you buy, do you borrow? And now there's so many more options. Do you build an AI agent instead?
Right.
Do you think about crowdsourcing? There's just a lot of various options that have come into play. And to your point, really critical that you inspire your team, your organization to always be outside in, look at what's happening outside, apply it internally, and understand what could have greater effect and the impact of that. Again, married to that, where are we trying to go? What are the winds buffeting us on our journey? And based on that, what are going to be the best solutions to apply?
And Jordana, we've been talking about really how you engage with your C-suite peers, other business leaders. But one of the stakeholders, at least for a public company, is certainly the board of directors, right, in all of this as well. And boards over the last few years have had a number of name changes from comp committee to represent their expanded interest in these human topics. Can you share a little bit about how you, as a CHRO, think about engaging with the board of directors on these topics?
Yes. Well, first of all, I think comp committees have transitioned to comp and org committees or some derivation of that theme because of the concept that talent is not guaranteed anymore. That there is, in specialty areas, growing scarcity issues in certain types of talent. So, of course, you think about boards being a governance body that's ensuring that the organization at large is thinking about and has a strategy for the business and for the ability to deliver the business in this sense through people,
Yeah.
of course it makes sense that they would expand in that framework, given a context that perhaps there's not a guarantee of talent.
Yeah.
So when I'm thinking about the work of the board, though, it's really important to realize, but that is where they're coming from. They don't need or want to know every detail of how you're operationalizing your strategy, people strategy, business strategy, every detail of it.
Yep.
But they want to know and verify that you have one.
Yep.
So on people, that's a place where my team has a structure set to say, hey, given the charter of the committee, given the human capital risks that we've identified as part of our organizational processes, let's make sure that throughout the year with our comp and org committee at least, we're broadly addressing these themes and making sure that there's awareness and that any questions or ideas that this amazing group of individuals that your board is comprised of, that they have the opportunity to see, add insight, and do their role of verification.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Jordana, one of the things you just shared relative to the board is it's a governance body. And it's something that I hear from senior HR leaders who become a CHRO for the first time. Often it's a learning experience for them to then engage with the board and know that the C-suite is the management body and the board is a governance body. And there's specific ways in which you want to engage on topics. And so I'd like to get a little bit of your perspective on a couple things for those senior HR leaders who are out there aspiring to become a CHRO, right? Maybe we'll start with looking back, especially since you've been a multi-time CHRO. What are some of your lessons learned that you would share with folks now as they prepare for their first time potentially in the role?
Well, as you say, the board is a governing body and they're not a management body, but they're also comprised of people who were at one time or still are in management bodies of other companies and or education, industry, insights. So I think one of the biggest lessons is really don't overcorrect as a CHRO. And what I mean by that is, of course, you want to make sure that you're giving the right amount of information, not too much, that you're really working through the process. But you should not ignore this amazing opportunity in front of you that you have several industry leaders who are very interested and have a vested interest in your company. They have even a financial stake in your company. And you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of their insight, their advice. I think first-time CHROs probably don't. I know I didn't because I wasn't aware of that. And remember, I came from a private company to a public CHRO for the first time. So I didn't really get to see it in action as much either. But really important, if you're thinking about it or your first time CHRO, reach out and in between board meetings and ask for advice and ask for perspective and ask for connectivity because your board members are amazing and have a network far beyond yours as well, right? Just the amplification of the network, and you really can get some great thought partner insight on topics that are new or even traditional topics. So that would be my advice.
Well, and they're invested in not only the company's success, but your individual success as an executive.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, Jordana, you've also, in time, as a multi-time CHRO, probably seen the skills or the expectations shift in the role a little bit. As you look forward, what are things that you think aspiring CHROs need to consider relative to demonstrating their readiness for the role? Or how are they going to show up in front of a CEO in an interview and the CEO is going to say, I know this person's ready to be my business partner?
Well, first of all, I want to say that it's a very personal relationship, the CEO, CHRO. It usually has to have a level of trust and confidence that goes beyond the work because you're talking about people, you're dealing with people, and at the C-suite and the board. And the CEO is often looking to their CHRO and other trusted members of their team, but it is the CHRO's role to be the person that they can bounce ideas, issues about other members of the team against, right? And so there has to be some sort of chemistry. I say that because if, in fact, you are all the way there, just beneath that job, and it opens up, and you maybe aren't the one person for it or you don't get it, it might not be because you don't have the skills in a technical basis. It might be because it's just not the right chemistry. And I really want to stress that because I want people to feel good about making sure that as they choose this role, they're also choosing a CEO partner and a C-suite of colleagues, and be thoughtful about that. And also know that that part is not necessarily something you can control, right? Okay, but now technical capabilities and or competencies. A CHRO today, in the past as well, but even more today, has to be incredibly strategic. And I mean that by saying the ability to synthesize multiple data points. Business data points, I said context data points, people data points. It's really helpful if they have a good understanding of how people operate in small groups and large groups. My sociology background, I cannot stress enough. Very helpful in my career as a CHRO. So being a student of strategy, being a student of business, being a student of people, and being able to synthesize that knowledge into, as I said, that predictive capability of what do we want to achieve? What do we need to do on a business front, a capability front, but also how do we need to engage our people, our customers, the world at large, so to speak, to believe in us and to put all their discretionary effort and trust into this prospect to be able to have those business outcomes you seek, and really phenomenal business outcomes, right? So to me, that's some of the ways that a CHRO, great CHRO and a CHRO that's evolving today needs to be and show up. And there's a lot of other great technical examples and skill sets that you can go to Gartner for and other places. Deloitte has a profile. I mean, there's a lot of places that have good competency/technical profiles. But if you ask me more of the secret sauce, it would be that.
I think it's such a great reminder to folks always, regardless of level, when you are interviewing for a role, you should be interviewing them just as much, right? And especially at the C-suite level, especially whether it's first time, third time, whatever time to step into a CHRO role, you want to make sure that you and the executive team are all set up for success working together, because you are the C-suite, you are the executive team, right? It is a team. It is not I, the CHRO type of thing. And so, Jordana, maybe we'll close with a couple questions around Corning, as a company, has a history of innovation, right? And maybe that's some of what attracted you to it, right? Your own comment earlier around you liking a challenge. And how do you think about where Corning is headed going forward and the role that you and your function have to play relative to that in terms of unlocking the talent and skills and capabilities within the workforce broadly to continue to drive that rich history of innovation and deliver new and different business outcomes for not only the company, but really your end customers?
Corning is an amazing place, 170 plus years of history, as you say, to build upon. And it is a place that has reinvented itself and innovated its way to greatness. And so the challenge, I think, in an organization like that is that as the world around you changes, how do you know and how do you judge what you must keep the same because it is part of your formula for excellence and capability? And what is it that you must change in order to respond to the evolving environment? And I speak generally of this, not specifically per se about any of Corning's strategies or business strategies. But I say that generally from a cultural standpoint when you look at any company that has a rich, rich history. For us, specifically thinking about some of how we were born, right? Born of a smaller town in upstate New York, born of a very tight-knit community that then grew really broadly beyond that, right? Much more broadly. You think, how do you as a company maintain the culture of close association and family and care and commitment while operating with 55,000 people around the world? It's just one example of how when you have this rich history and this long legacy, you have to be very thoughtful as a leader in the company, but also as a HR leader who's responsible for helping to cultivate culture. What do you keep? What do you change? What do you aspire to be? And how do you also appropriately challenge your own thinking and the thinking of others that, well, we got here doing this, so if we keep doing this, of course, we'll get to the next place. Which, as we know, isn't always true. But sometimes it is. So you have to be really thoughtful about it.
And Jordana, as you think about your path forward with the HR function, I know, coming up almost 2 years?
Yes.
So you've had time to digest, you've had time to build your team. What are a couple of things that you're really excited about looking forward, driving business outcome and driving, change for your team at large?
Well, as I mentioned, you come from a smaller company and you grow really large and you think about that closeness and commitment, the ability to know what capability you should set against what obstacle or what opportunity, it really is more organic in the beginning. And so I'm really excited about the work my team is doing to bring more scalable structure to that so that we capture all the goodness and uniqueness of how we identify great talent for our company's unique needs, which is a combination of innovation, technical excellence, and entrepreneurship. How do we, as we're looking forward, how we're bringing more cutting-edge technical tools to that. So we're really exploring AI-enabled skill taxonomies and how do we capture and scrape all the data available to us around the individual and be able to tag those skills to the person so that we really have this rich tapestry, but the ability to see each thread in it and know then if we want to create a new network or a new tapestry for something, we know exactly which threads to pull to weave together, right? So that's I'm really excited about the work the team's doing around that and that the leadership team is doing too, because it takes a commitment of all people involved to say, let's try new processes and approaches in order to create a more scalable talent identification and development machine, if you will.
Awesome.
I'm super excited about the work that the team is doing around culture and resiliency and people effectiveness and all the things that we're thinking about and doing to promote, I'll call it mass development of people. And when I say mass, I say it in the best way, not in a generalized cookie cutter way, but in a way that allows customization, but also allows for the leadership development of a large group of people. So we started to move there last year, and now we're bringing in new things like AI coaching into the mix so that everybody has that opportunity to have a really consistent and great coach. And it's an agent and an AI agent, but hey, I have conversations with ChatGPT and Claude all the time, and I think it's great. So I'm excited to be able to provide that for the organization. Really excited also about bringing these new capabilities to our own delivery of HR for the broader enterprise. I think the agentification of HR services with the end in mind that it deliver a better employee and manager experience. You need to have both. I think that really has the opportunity to do what we've been asking to do for the last 5 or 10 years, which is bring our 9 to 5 to feel like our 5 to 9. Right? I want to be able to have that on-demand service that you get around Netflix and Amazon and all those places. I want to have that personalization at work for our people. So I'm super excited about the work my team is doing around that too. So a lot of good stuff coming.
Awesome. Jordana, this has been an incredible conversation. I can't thank you enough for joining Capital H to share your journey, share your insights on business leadership and HR leadership, and the exciting things that you're doing at Corning in partnership with the C-suite, with the board, and with your HR leadership team. Your advice will definitely be invaluable, not only to our listeners who are aspiring CHROs, but to business leaders, to HR professionals who are in the midst of their own transformation and thinking about can I find some insight from another organization or a peer or someone that helps me along the way. So thank you for joining here in Las Vegas from Transform. To our Capital H audience, thank you for tuning in. Stay with us for more great conversations from Transform in Las Vegas. And Jordana, just thank you again.
Thank you.
This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, please go to deloitte.com/about.